And now it is my honor to welcome back Dr. David Pearson, one of the foremost experts on reading comprehension. Dr. Pearson has made extraordinary contributions to the field of reading. He is a faculty member and the former dean of the Graduate School of Education at UC Berkeley. He is recognized internationally as the premier scholar on reading comprehension instruction and assessment. He is the recipient of the most prestigious honors awarded by the major national and international associations in reading. Dr. Pearson is a prolific author. He is the author of 15 books and more than 150 journal articles. He has served as editor for the Handbook of Reading Research, Reading Research Quarterly, and the Review of Research in Education. Most recently, Dr. Pearson was also a member of the Select Validation Committee for the Common Core State Standards. In addition to holding great expertise in literacy, Dr. Pearson is a passionate supporter of teachers and their critical role as educators. As his words so eloquently state, and I quote Dr. Pearson, "A teacher's job is always to bridge from the known to the new, because there really is no other choice. Kids are who they are. They know what they know. They bring what they bring. Our job is not to wish that students knew more or knew differently. Our job is to turn each student's knowledge, along with the diversity of knowledge we will encounter in a classroom of learners, into a curricular strength rather than an instructional inconvenience." That quote itself is a very appropriate introduction to today's webinar. And now I give to you Dr. David Pearson.
Okay, well, with any luck, thanks so much, Jenny. The quote you provided at the end of my introduction is one of my personal favorites, and I think it's so true that we need to learn how to respect and take advantage of what kids bring to the classroom. I want to discuss 3 research-based principles in greater depth, and I've managed to embed glimpses of 2 others into the 3 that I discuss in greater depth. You can download the presentation at either www.scienceandliteracy.org, which is where I store most of my presentations, or I'm sure it'll be on the Reading Plus website, and Jenny can point you to that at the end of the presentation today. If you want more information about my views of comprehension, I've listed 4 articles here, actually 3 articles and a monograph that I was involved in writing for the National Center for Educational Evaluation and Regional Assistance. But the one that's in bold is the one upon which today's presentation is based. Well, why comprehension? Well, I think we need to focus on comprehension to keep our curricular wits about us. We know that there are a lot of enablers, what I call enabling skills, and we need to keep those separate from the goals of reading instruction. So, for example, phonemic awareness may be important, but it's on the pathway to phonics, which may be important too, and I think it is, but it's on the pathway to word reading, which also is important, but it's on the pathway to comprehension, which may be important, but it's itself on the pathway to critical reasoning. But that is only a means to another end, and that is so that we educate kids who are capable of taking action to make our lives and our democracy better than it ever has been. So really, the job of all of these skills that we teach in schools is really to create citizens who can improve our society. Now, we spent a decade during the era of No Child Left Behind worrying a lot about what I call the enabling skills. Scott Paris calls these constrained skills. I call them mastery skills, and the reason I do is that, you know, if you think about all the letter sounds in the English language, you could actually think about, you know, developing a level of mastery over them. And then on the other side are unconstrained, or what I call growth skills. And these are different from mastery skills because no matter how good you get at them, you can always get better. If you take comprehension and being able to read critically, you can always do that better than you're currently doing it. And just because you did well today doesn't mean that will stop you from doing it tomorrow. Whereas with code and some of the more text level tasks, we can imagine, you know, sort of dialing down the instruction once you've achieved mastery. So for on the reading side, the code and the text level tasks, and on the writing side, conventions and craft are sort of the enablers. The outcomes are comprehension and critique, and composition and analysis on the writing side of things. So I like to keep those separated because I want to make sure that we keep our eyes on the ends of reading and writing instruction and realize that the means are an important play an important role in helping us achieve those ends. Well, and why comprehension now? Well, I think the new game in town, the Common Core Standards, has really changed the game for us in teaching reading. We're teaching for understanding, and we're doing it with high levels of accountability. More challenging curriculum for all kids in terms of both the tasks we ask them to do, and as I'm sure you're all aware, as we march out these standards, and the challenge of the text we ask them to read. But we've got a new thing going. I think that in the decade of No Child Left Behind, I think we operated a little bit on what I call a basic skills conspiracy, and that is first you got to get the words right and the facts straight before you can do the what ifs and I wonder what's of the curriculum. But I think now the name of the game is replacing it with a keep your eye on the prize approach. And that is, we know that skills are the enablers to keep you on the road to meaning and critique. But keeping our eye on the ability to read for meaning and to read critically is really what's most essential in this new game that we're all about with the Common Core Standards. So how do you design a comprehension curriculum for teachers to enact in their classrooms? Well, I think you need a goal, and you need a set of principles, and you need a set of practices to enact those principles. And that's what I really want to share with you today. The goal is the active critical meaning maker. And here's one here. Now, I'm biased toward this one because this is actually my grandson Tobias, and this was taken a couple of years ago. He's 6 now and in kindergarten, but this was when he was about 4. And I want you to observe the journal he's reading. It's one of his father's journal. And I don't know whether he can read it or not, but he certainly got the right idea in terms of being a critical reader. And I hope he continues on that pathway. For my model of comprehension and what it means to be a reader, I want to use a text from Stephen King, and from his memoir of the craft about writing. He got it right about what it takes to build a model of meaning. I'm going to share some of his words with you, and I want you to listen as I share his words, okay? So let's assume that you're in your favorite receiving place, just as I'm in the place where I do my best transmitting. We'll have to perform our mental routine not just over distance, but also over time as well. Yet that presents no real problem. If we can still read Dickens, Shakespeare, and with the help of a footnote or two, Herodotus, I think we can manage the gap between 1997 and 2014. He wrote this in 97. And here you go. Actual telepathy in action. You'll notice I have nothing up my sleeves and that my lips never move. Neither, most likely, do yours. Look, here's a table covered with a red cloth. On it is a cage the size of a small fish aquarium. In the cage is a white rabbit with a pink nose and pink rimmed eyes. In its front paw is a carrot stub upon which it is contentedly munching. On its back, clearly marked in blue ink, is the numeral 8. Do we see the same thing? We'd have to get together and compare notes to make absolutely sure, but I think we do. There will be necessary variations, of course. Some receivers will see a cloth which is turkey red. Some will see one that's scarlet, while others may see still other shades. To colorblind receivers, the red tablecloth is the dark gray of cigar ashes. Some may see scalloped edges, some may see straight ones. Decorative souls may add a little lace, and welcome. My tablecloth is your tablecloth. Knock yourself out. Likewise, the matter of the cage leaves quite a bit of room for individual interpretation. For one thing, it's described in terms of rough comparison, which is useful only if you and I see the world and measure the things in it with similar eyes. It's easy to become careless when making rough comparisons, but the alternative is a pursy attention to detail that takes all the fun out of writing. What am I going to say? On a table is a cage 3 feet 6 inches in length, 2 feet in width, and 14 inches high. That's not prose, that's an instruction manual. The paragraph also doesn't tell us what sort of material the cage is made of. Wire mesh, steel rods, glass, but does it really matter? We all understand that the cage is a see-through medium. Beyond that, we don't care. The most interesting thing here isn't even the carrot munching rabbit in the cage, but the number on its back. Not a 6, not a 4, not 19.5, it's an 8. This is what we're looking at, and we all see it. I didn't tell you. You didn't ask me. I never opened my mouth, and you never opened yours. We're not even in the same year together, let alone in the same room, except we are together. We're close. We're having a meeting of the minds. Well, what can we learn from this wonderful quote by Stephen King about building mental models? The first thing we can learn is that writers leave a lot on the printed page to work with, but writers also expect us to fill in some of the details in building a model of meaning. They don't tell us everything we need to understand in order to make sense out of their text. They don't tell us the things that we think we can figure out for ourselves. Second thing is that no two readers will ever build exactly the same mental model for a text they read. But our mental models will often be similar enough to allow us to talk about a text. That is, we can get together and agree on the general frame, maybe not on all the specific details. And by the way, when we build our mental models, it all depends on whether we're sitting there by ourselves or we're doing it in a reading group with 5 or 6 other kids, or we're doing it on a test, because it breeds different levels of accountability. When I'm reading by myself, I can make the text mean anything I want it to mean. But if I'm reading and talking to you, then I have to be accountable to you. And if we're doing it for a test, then we have to be accountable to the test makers and the people in the culture who allowed this test to be made. Uh, the other thing we learn from Stephen King is that some text details are more important than others. Now, for example, his example there about the numeral 8 being more important than the descriptions of the cage and the like. And finally, I have a question for you. Whose minds meet in reading? It's the reader and the author, isn't it? And that's one of the things that points out, is that reading is an inherently social activity, because you always have the author on the other end sharing things with you and providing input into the sense you're making out of the text. Here's another quote that I think captures this thing, and this is from Mortimer Adler in his famous book, How to Read a Book, and this is a section called Reading with a Pen, in which he's encouraging us to do close reading by having a pen in hand so that we can comment on the text as we read it and make notes in the margin. And he says, and that is exactly what reading a book should be, a conversation between you and the author. Presumably he, I think they mean the author when they say he, right? You can tell that this was written in the 40s rather than the 2000s, right? Presumably he knows more about the subject than you do. Naturally, you'll have the proper humility as you approach him. But don't let anybody tell you that a reader is supposed to be solely on the receiving end. Understanding is a two-way operation. Learning doesn't consist in being an empty receptacle. The learner has to question himself and question the teacher. He even has to argue with the teacher once he understands what the teacher is saying. And marking a book is literally an expression of differences or agreements of opinion with the author. I find that really compelling, and I know that myself, when I'm taking notes as I read, I take two kinds of notes. If I know a lot about a, a, a topic, then my notes tend to be kind of an argument with the author, and I even say nonsense and things like that. But if I'm reading on a topic I don't know much about, my marginal notes tend to be more or less an outline of what I think the author is trying to say. So it does interact with how much you already know about things. One more text on reading. This is the model from the RAND report on reading comprehension, which came out in 2002. And they had, their notion is that reading and comprehension occurs at the center of this triad of reader, text, and activity. That is, there's a reader, there's a text you're reading, and then there's an activity you're doing in the name of trying to understand the text. And all that occurs within a socio-cultural context. And here's their definition, and I want you to pay close attention to it because I think it captures this balance between what the reader brings and what the text brings. The definition of reading comprehension is the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through interaction and involvement with written language. Now let's take that. Simultaneously extracting. When you're extracting meaning, what are you doing? You're going to the text and you're letting the text speak to you. And then constructing meaning, what are you doing there? That's where you're sort of taking what you got from the text, you're mushing it around with the knowledge that you brought to the text, and that's the construction process. And then you're putting it back in your head because it now becomes knowledge available for future use. We use the words extracting and constructing to emphasize both the importance and the insufficiency of the text as a determinant of reading comprehension. And that is, I think, exactly the tension that the Common Core standards bring out to us, the tension between getting the text right and constructing meaning that leads to knowledge so that you know more about the world as a result of reading. From the Duke, Pearson, and Strachan and Billman piece, I have taken 10, we have 10 key practices, and I can't possibly touch on all of them today. And there's the title of the book that it's from, and it's available through the International Reading Association. And again, the pre-publication copy of that article is available, as well as this presentation will be on that scienceandliteracy.org website. Here are the 10 principles that Nell, Duke, and I and my colleagues built. Number one, build disciplinary and world knowledge. The ones in purple are the ones I'm going to discuss today. Number two, provide exposure to a volume and range of texts. We know how important that is for the Common Core standards. Number three, provide motivating texts and context for reading. Number four, teach strategies for comprehending. So 1, 3, and 4 are the primary emphasis of the day. Teach text structures. It's important. I'm not going to have time to talk about it today. Engage students in discussion. Talk about text. That's really important, but again, no time today. Number 7, build vocabulary and language knowledge. Number 8, integrate reading and writing. And then observe and assess and differentiate instruction depending upon how kids are doing in your class. Okay? So those are the 10 principles. Number 1, build disciplinary and world knowledge. And in this, I'm going to embed number 8 and number 7, okay? Because I'm going to talk about how important the reading-writing connection is when you're building knowledge, and how important making sure that we do a good job of teaching vocabulary and helping kids with language development is to comprehension, okay? So the dilemma we face in teaching reading is this. The more kids know, the better they understand. The more time we devote to reading in our school day, the less time there is for social studies and science. The less time for social studies and science, right? Science and social studies, what? The less kids learn and the less they know. The less they know, the harder it is for them to comprehend. So the deal here is the cost of teaching reading better cannot be teaching the disciplines worse. And that's really what we have to avoid as we try to get ourselves out of this dilemma. My solution is to do the following. I want to replace the vicious cycle where, you know, failure breeds lack of motivation, and lack of motivation, you don't try, and then that makes you fail even more. And so low motivation and failure just feed on one another. This is the virtuous cycle. The more you know, the better you understand. The better you understand, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more you know, because you can take what you learn from reading and feed that back into the knowledge that's in your head. And then the more you know, the better you understand, and on and on and on. And that's the virtuous cycle that the Common Core standards are all about, and that I think we need to embrace as we move forward in trying to meet those standards. Well, how to implement my solution? The first thing that I would do if I could make it happen is I'd have much more use of expository text in core reading programs. And then I'd also have more reading, writing, and language instruction situated within science and social studies curriculum. And I'd start that. I wouldn't wait till grade 3 or 4. I'd start it right in grade kindergarten. And then I'd always embrace reading, writing, and language as tools for acquiring more disciplinary knowledge. This is the logic that we've used with my colleagues up at Lawrence Hall of Science in building a science program that also teaches some reading along the way. And we call it Seeds of Science, Roots of Reading, but that's really our goal. That is, we're trying to get rid of this model of school curriculum in which each discipline has its own silo. And, this happens clearly at the secondary level, but, it happens at the elementary level too, right? Because when we switched from science to social studies to language arts, kids leave what they've learned in one subject behind and then just operate within the constraints of the new subject matter. Well, I want a different model. I want one that looks like this, where you think of science, social studies, mathematics, and I would add literature and consider those the disciplines that we're trying to help kids acquire knowledge in. Okay, and then reading, writing, and language are the tools we use to acquire knowledge and to acquire the inquiry skills that operate within each of those disciplines. So it's more of a, reading, writing, and language are woven into these disciplines. I actually tried to make a, a diagram of how you could weave reading, writing, and language into the disciplines, but I'm not very good at drawing those things. So I went out and found a picture of a loom, which I think does a better job than my drawing attempts do. But the idea here is that it's the warp and the weft. Reading, writing, and language are the tools, and those are going to be embedded in and woven into the disciplines. And that's really the way I want us to think about how it is we're going to do this. In the process of doing this, we're also going to spend a lot of time having kids doing reading and writing and oral language activities, but we're also going to take advantage of the fact that reading helps writing and writing helps reading. One of the ways that reading helps writing is that if you look at text, you'll find lots of models for text structure, how to organize a story, how to develop a problem solution paragraph. You'll find lots of conventions about writing. You can look to see how authors use adjectives to make characters come alive. You can look at good word choice. That is, text is full of all kinds of things, all kinds of models that'll help you with writing. And writing also helps reading. One of the things that writing does is it allows us to assess our understanding via the notes we take and the summaries we try to write. That's a really good way to sort of assess and also to nurture your understanding. Writing can serve as a mnemonic for remembering things. When we write things down, it increases the likelihood that we'll learn and remember them. And the other thing about reading and writing is that if you look, one of the criteria we often use in writing to judge its quality is coherence. That is, how cohesive are the ideas within and across paragraphs. Well, when you're looking at coherence in writing, it's almost looking at it's just like looking at main idea detail relationships in reading. So if you're helping kids become more coherent writers, you should also be helping them become better at finding main ideas and hooking details to them. There's a technique called questioning the author, where that was promoted by Isabel Beck and Monty McCune. And one of the things that they did is they encouraged teachers and kids to sort of try to figure out what the author was doing at various points along the way, or like, why do you suppose the author used these words here to describe that character? Well, that's a baby step in critical reading on the other side, right? And so I think both of those techniques are when you and even when you have author's chair and you ask the author why they did things, it's sort of like doing critical reading in the reading side of things. Even when you ask kids to do invented spelling when they write, and you say, well, you can spell that word cat. Here, I'll give you 3 boxes and you fill in the ones you can. You fill in the letters you can. You can't do that invented spelling task or sound-based spelling without also engaging in the process of segmenting the stream of speech, which is what we're trying to promote in phonemic awareness. So there's lots of those synergies between reading and writing. Why writing helps reading and that some more. You can't write without reading. You are always the writer's first reader. That's a famous line by a wonderful writing researcher, Don Murray. And when you write, you often seek information through reading, right? This is especially true in the Common Core, where so much of the writing is writing from sources. And that means that you have to read things and then use what you've learned from reading as the evidentiary base for supporting the claims you're making in writing. The other thing is that writing makes the metaphor of constructing a model of meaning completely explicit, because when you're writing, you're literally constructing a model of meaning for the text you're writing. And the other thing that I find is that writing helps me decide what I really think about a topic. When I have to write about a topic, it clarifies my own thinking because the text stares back at you if it doesn't ring true or sound right. The other thing that writing does is that writing is inherently a kind of a metacognitive process. That is, you sort of write one word at a time. So there's always thinking about what you're doing when you're writing. So it makes the monitoring, highly transparent. And sometimes when we're reading, it's hard to see how we're monitoring what it is we're up to. The other thing that we find in our work at Lawrence Hall of Science is that when we encounter a new word, or when we encounter a grammatical structure, or even when we encounter a new idea, one of the things we try to do is to embed it in different multimodal environments, read it, write it, talk it, and in science, since you're doing hands-on science, we do it too. So our mantra is read it, write it, talk it, do it. And every time you meet a new word, if you could encounter it in those modalities, you dramatically increase the likelihood that you'll learn and remember it. But the same thing is true with different kinds of genres and sentence structures, and also even with the ideas that you encounter, the concepts you encounter, right? If you want to read more on the reading writing integration, there's a great piece by James Collins and his colleagues at SUNY Buffalo, where they've used writing as a way of developing struggling learners higher level reading comprehension. And there's an IRA book, it's called Building Struggling Students Higher Level Literacy, Practical Ideas and Powerful Solutions. It's a great book if your goal is to use writing to support reading. Also, we can build knowledge through vocabulary and helping kids enhance their knowledge about language. Here's a way that in our work we try to think about this whole thing, that there's different levels at which you can interact with a word. We can try to recognize a word, that is, do something like just display it and read it and the like. And by the way, I want to give a shout out to my colleagues Gina Cervetti and Marco Bravo for coming up with this conceptualization in our work on seeds and roots. You can also define a word. A habitat is the place where an organism gets the food, water, light, and shelter that it needs to survive. You can examine a word in terms of how it's related to other words. You can build semantic maps for the word, and that's another kind of context of encountering the word, and you learn where a word fits when you do that. You can also encounter the word in a real context, in a text, and every time you encounter a word in a context, you'll learn a little bit more about it, so that by the time you've encountered a word 10 or 20 or 30 times, you know a lot more about the word simply by inferring aspects of its meaning from each of those encounters. And then if you actually encourage kids to use the word when they're like carrying out a science experiment, or even talking about what they're doing in their science activities, that's another way of establishing a new kind of relationship with other ideas to which the word relates. And then finally, if you can get kids to use the word when they're synthesizing their knowledge about a particular a particular segment of a text that they might have read, then that even enhances their knowledge of that word and the likelihood that they'll be able to use it as a part of their oral and written vocabulary later on. The key things are the ones that are outlined in yellow. Those are where we really get at deep meaning. The problem is that most often in some of our reading instruction, if it's shallow, we'll leave it off at recognition and definition. But if you want kids to really, in use vocabulary as a way of enhancing knowledge, this is the way to go. By the way, one of the things we like to do is to use vocabulary as a way of naming our knowledge and as a sort of a label for our knowledge as it grows throughout a unit. So, for example, if we have a unit about organisms, we might learn that they're living things such as plants and animals. And then, a day or two later, we might encounter the fact that organisms live in habitats, and now that gets related to organism because it's the place where the organism lives and gets what it needs to survive. And when you're in a habitat, you're likely to develop some adaptations, ways of behaving, or even structural adaptations. For example, a root is a structural adaptation of a plant that is going to enable it to get the nutrients that it needs to survive, right? And roots are in the soil, which is where that's part of the habitat. The soil is in the habitat, and that's where the organism lives. And there are decomposers out there, and the decomposers provide the nutrients that are going to help the plant grow and prosper and the like. So this is probably a couple of weeks worth of instruction, and kids are acquiring knowledge, but then the vocabulary comes in as the way of naming the knowledge that we're acquiring. And this is exactly how we want to see the relationship between vocabulary and knowledge growth, okay? And that then becomes, vocabulary become the labels for our new knowledge. You can even do it with science process words too, build these semantic networks like this, like we observe things, and observing is a way of investigating, and we get evidence and we can explain the evidence, and then we use tools when we do the observation, and also we make records of it, and then the records that we make of it in our notes provide evidence that we can later use to explain what we're learning in our science stuff. So ways of relating words semantically like this are very powerful in terms of both vocabulary growth and knowledge growth. Okay. Well, so knowledge is the name of the game, and there are some other things we can do to increase comprehension that aren't directly related to knowledge. So, for example, we know that engagement is really an important principle. John Guthrie, in his Corey work, has really provided us with a wonderful theory and model of how to get kids more engaged as readers. We know that kids read better, write better, and learn more when they're engaged. And they're more engaged when teachers apply these principles: choice and autonomy, self-efficacy, interest, collaboration, and curricular coherence. Choice. Kids need to be involved in making choices about what they read, about what they write, about how they represent themselves as learners. 15 years ago when portfolios were so popular, one of the things I liked best about them is that they involved kids in self-assessment. That is, they had to choose the artifacts that represented who they were as learners and what they learned. Now, we can also even give kids choice in terms of how they demonstrate that they've understood something. One kid could write a summary, another kid could answer a set of questions, a third kid could make a drawing or maybe reenact the story of the like. So giving kids some choice there is important too. Kids should also be involved in setting goals for learning, because somehow, somewhere along the way, they're going to get out of school, and when they get out of school, they're going to have to learn how to set goals for themselves in the workplace and when they go on to higher education. So involving kids in making choices as early as possible is an important part of engagement. Self-efficacy. Kids need to learn how to monitor and to calibrate their effort so that they can optimize their learning. And it's really important when they do this that they attribute any successes they have to effort and not ability or fate. Because if kids think that some kids do better than others because they're just natural born readers or natural born writers, then if they're not doing well, it will discourage them from applying themselves and trying harder. And we also know that when kids attribute their successes to effort, that they can become more conscientious, develop greater stamina and persistence. And by the way, as we up the ante in terms of the complexity of the texts that kids read, we're really going to have to work on helping kids develop stamina and persistence because those will be much more demanded in the era of the Common Core. And all of this leads to a kind of a can-do attitude, like I can figure this out and I can learn for myself. And when kids develop these attitudes, they're much more engaged in the learning process. Interest is another key aspect here. Other things being equal, kids can read a couple of grade levels higher on topics of personal interest than they can on topics of low interest. Uh, we uh, we distinguish between personal interest and situational interest. We want everyone to develop personal interests because personal interests are self-sustaining. But the way that you as a teacher can do that is by helping kids develop uh, by providing situational interest where you try to make a topic or a genre of reading more alluring and the like, and you try to hook kids on that and then hope that that situational interest becomes a personal interest. And then collaboration is important, other things being equal. Students are more engaged in partner or small group work than working on their own. And this is important too because if you look at the whole portfolio of 21st century skills that people are talking about is so important these days. Collaboration is important because it's important in the workplace. And so getting kids to learn how to collaborate in schools is an important goal for us. And then finally, curricular coherence. Um, the more relevant things are to kids and the more that they connect with their lives, the more engaged they'll be. If the curriculum is presented in a cohesive manner where you could connect the parts like within a unit so that what you're doing in the second week connects back with what you're doing in the first week, that's great. And then finally, if you can make sure that the goals and assignments are clear and ensure that kids have the necessary skills and strategies to complete the task, especially when you ask them to do them on their own. Uh, that also keeps them more engaged. When kids get lost and they either don't have the skills or they're not sure what they're supposed to do, they tune out and often do things other than what we'd like them to do in class. So that's the portfolio engagement strategies that we know can maximize student learning. Uh, so the last point is what strategies do we teach for comprehension? What strategies do we pick and how do we teach them? Well, there's a lot of ways to pick strategies. You can look at the National Reading Panel stuff. You can look uh, at what Nell and I put in our article. You can look at routines such as reciprocal teaching or transactional strategies instruction. You can even look at the Common Core standards, which I like to do. The good news is there's lots of overlap. There's no definitive set of strategies, but I like to pick somewhere between about 6 and 8 or 10, and I think by the time you get up to 10, you're about at the limit as to what you can expect kids to engage in. So I don't have a lot of advice about which ones you pick. Here are the ones that Nell and I emphasized in our articles about comprehension, and mainly because we could find research that supported each of these strategies as something that will lead to better comprehension. Okay, so these are the ones that we picked, but you could pick others, and no matter which set you go to, you'll find a lot of overlap. You could even pick the Common Core standards. I actually think that if you regard these as kind of strategies, if you think of these as tasks that kids do, and then you think of how I could develop a strategic approach to teaching each of those. These could be the strategies in your toolbox that you ask kids to do. And you know, there's those 10 recurring standards. They show up grade after grade in more complex actions to more sophisticated texts across those disciplines of literature, science, and social studies. And one way to, I think, try to handle the strategies thing is to see how well you can connect them to the Common Core standards, so that when you're teaching the standards, you're also teaching kids to become strategic readers. The evidence for strategies is pretty powerful. When kids learn specific strategies, uh, they get better at those strategies. They learn the content of the lessons better, and there's some evidence in several of the studies for an increase in more general comprehension. Suites of strategies, such as transactional strategies instruction, appear to be more effective than a string of individual strategies. And that stands to reason because they're learning which strategies they could haul out for different parts of their you know different problems that they encounter. It would be irresponsible, I think, not to teach them, because even if we never know when kids might actually need them, so I think making sure that kids have access to those strategies is really important. But there are a few cautions with strategies. Like phonics rules, they can become an end unto themselves rather than a means to an end. They have to be used strategically when comprehension breaks down. Otherwise, we just do it. And I like to make a distinction between, um, you know, strategies and skills. And I like to think of a strategy as a skill that's under deliberate rather than automatic control. You know, most of the time when we read, we're doing what I call Nike reading, and that is we're just doing it and we're not thinking about it. But when the going gets tough, when we hit a clunk rather than a click of comprehension, we often revert to Sherlock Holmes reading. And this is where strategies come in, because things become under deliberate control. You know, I'm going to skip over this part here, but I'll leave it on the thing. We've learned a lot about strategies over the last several years. Back in the 70s, we didn't do them. And Dolores Durkin chided us as a profession for not doing them. And I remember when I took my graduate courses at Minnesota, people would say that comprehension is caught, not taught. Well, we've really changed our mind nowadays, because now we actually think it can be taught. And then we developed single strategies, and we taught them one at a time. And I was very much involved in this. There's people started to develop suites. Paris, Lipson, and Wixon developed a suite of strategies at Michigan. And I think the Mosaic of Thought book is still aligned with this, one strategy at a time approach. Then we got into multiple strategies like reciprocal teaching. And then we got into transactional strategies, which were just like a toolkit of a bunch of strategies, and you haul out just the right strategy when the going gets tough. And now I think we're in a wave where we're not quite so sure how much strategy instruction we want to offer, or whether we want to just do it before kids read, or maybe just look for opportunities to apply strategies on the fly, and invoke them to solve particular problems with text just as they arise, which a lot of people, I think, are favoring nowadays. My hope for the future is that there's strategies turn out something in between explicit lessons, opportunistic instruction, and mini lessons, a la whole language. I think our examples for strategies always have to be authentic. And I think the best way to teach them is to just roll up your sleeves with the kids and go in and find genuinely puzzling parts of text and see if you can strategize about figuring out what the text means. My hope for the future is also that we'll have websites where kids can go and find resources of how to enact strategic routines. I think the ultimate goal, as I said earlier, is to help kids distinguish between Nike reading, just do it, and Sherlock Holmes reading. And as I say, you can even, I think, teach the Common Core standards either as each of these standards can be taught and practiced in its automatic mode, where you're just doing it, or it can be taught in a strategic enactment where you actually go through and work out problems with the kids about how to ascertain the point of view or the purpose that an author appears to have in mind. and the like. So I think that we could do it that way too. A reminder, these that I didn't talk about several of these, the ones that are in bolded black I didn't talk about, but they're as important as the five I did talk about, and we're there but world enough in time. We could spend a lot of time talking, for example, about the role of discussion or uh, you know, the role that just making sure that kids have access to a large amount of text has on improving comprehension. But all of them, as I said, are important. But the real reason that I'm care deeply about the what we're up to in this, and you know, I care about the quality of public education. I always have. I'm the product of a system from grade 1 all the way through graduate school. Went to public schools of one sort or another. But I care more these days because my grandson is now a part of that system, and his little sister and cousin will soon be a part of it too. And so I want us to make sure that your grandchildren and my grandchildren have an opportunity to engage in the what ifs and I wonder what's and the says who of instruction, and they don't get caught up on getting the words right and the facts straight. Although I want them to get the words right and the facts straight, but only because that makes the other things better. So these are the reasons that I care about this. God bless you for what you do for America's children, and I'm hoping that our country and our state and